Well, hello, everyone. It's great to have you join us. My name is Kevin Bowling, and I am the Executive Director of the Secular Student Alliance. Before we begin, we'll have obviously a couple more people, give us some time for people to join. And so I do want to tell you about our next webinar that is coming up. On March 22nd, so we have Your Students' Rights. And so Ian Smith, who's a staff attorney at American United for the Separation of Church and State, is going to do an overview of the law surrounding religion and public schools. And they developed a great campaign last year that they sort of launched last year amongst all of the COVID fund, just really honing in on religion and non-religion, students' rights to know in public education. So it's going to be a great program. If you're interested in that or any of our other webinars, please go to secularstudents.org/webinars, and you can see what we have to offer and register for those. So just before we begin, we will have a Q&A session following the presentation. So as we're going along, please feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A tab, and I'll go and relay those to Nadia at the end of the presentation so that we get your questions answered. So it's great having everyone here. We'll go ahead and begin. So this is how is social justice related to humanism? So Nadia Dutchin is the executive director, the new executive director of the American Humanist Association, and she has more than 10 years of community engagement, strategic planning, and youth program development experience. And so Nadia, we're very happy to have you joining us here today and very much look forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much, Kevin. It's wonderful to be here tonight with everyone. My name is Nadia Dutchin. I use she, her pronouns. I live here in Baltimore, Maryland. I am originally from Minneapolis. I was born and raised there. I attended college at Florida A&M University in Tallahassee, Florida. It is the most amazing historically Black college and university in the entire world. I'm biased. And I am indeed the new executive director of AHA. I started in December of last year, so I'm very, very new. I'm still learning and absorbing all of the movement history. There's a lot of history that I've been, immersed in the last couple of months. But what I will say is that I came here because of my work in climate justice, working in social justice, and working in healthcare nonprofit, doing movement building, particularly for young people. While I am not young, you can clearly see that. What I do in my professional world is hold space for young people and help to support and resource young folks. So I'm particularly, over the moon thrilled to be here talking with all of you. Kevin and I had a really wonderful conversation, an introductory conversation when I first started. And as he was explaining the engagement of AHA with SSA, I was literally sinking in my chair because I was very amazed, and not in a good way, that the AHA did not and has not really built a really, really deep relationship and deep engagement with young people. Not simply because you graduate and you become a member of the AHA. We, as the organization that are older, we've been around for 81 years. There's absolutely no reason that we should not be cultivating and nurturing and fostering young people at every level, secular young folks at every level of their education, be they in elementary school, middle school, high school, or at university or at the graduate level. So one of the things that I'm most interested in doing is really building a strong relationship between SSA and AHA. And then not in an extractive way. And let me be very clear about that. I'm not looking to use the energy of young people or my greatest fear is that, a young person would show up at an AHA meeting somewhere and the current members might, be like, oh, look, a young person, and overwhelm them. I don't want anything like that to happen. But what I think is really interesting, and I just want to kind of backtrack a little to my first couple of weeks coming into the AHA, I think I was very, very surprised to hear the question that is the subject of our talk today. There are a lot of our current members, people in our base, who do not understand the connection between social justice and humanism, who really have used the words too woke, or too far left. And it's been really difficult to swallow the idea that humanists don't and cannot see why social justice matters. And I mean, when I say social justice, I'm not saying that in just like a broad kind of paintbrushy kind of way. I mean, there are very pointed ways that we need to attack social justice issues, like language justice, disability justice, socioeconomic justice, reproductive justice, LGBTQIA plus justice, gender justice, housing justice, racial justice, food justice. There are so many issues that get at the very heart of people being able to live their full lives, which is one of the tenets of humanism. I find it really interesting that I'm having to have these conversations with people who are a bit older than I am, and some my age, who really have a hard time swallowing social justice as a form of humanism, and which caused me to learn more about our tenets as humanists. I will be very honest in saying that before I came to the AHA as its ED, although I was living as a humanist, I never called myself one. I have always identified myself as an atheist. And in that, I've hung out with like other Black atheist folks, just to have some kind of community and, gain some understanding about like the intersectional issues that affect me as an atheist Black woman. So it's been really nice having that community, but I don't know that I ever really defined myself as a humanist, even though I have a 7-year-old daughter who, I apologize, you will probably see very shortly. But I've been raising her as a humanist for years, because it's not my job to sway her in any one way to be for or against religion. She's little, she's very small, she believes in unicorns, religion, same thing. But my job is to help inform her and teach her how to think so that she can decide for herself when she gets older. And I hope I do a good job doing that. But I've been raising her as a humanist, literally saying we do not need to have a God. We don't need to believe in God to be good people. And it's the most important thing to me that I raise her in that fashion. So having said that, I'm coming into this movement somewhat untainted, if you will. I've not been in the humanist movement. I don't have like a history here. I don't have a history of being in secular congregations or secular spaces. I am coming from a professional standpoint. I come in here having worked with young people in healthcare nonprofit and in climate justice and clean energy, sustainability. Those are the places that I have worked, and those are the places that I've organized with, almost always with marginalized populations, traditionally marginalized populations. So I don't come in with the heaviness of like knowing what a movement is or was or what, I don't have to harken back to good old days because I don't know what they were. But what I do in this moment, I can see the greatest opportunity to help the AHA and SSA and other partner organizations in the secular movement create a really vibrant space for young folks, in particular, to find a wonderful, loving community. I know that there are a lot of folks who, particularly young folks who, may be segmented off from their family, either because they're queer or because they, those of us that have walked away from religion, we risk that all the time. We risk our families casting us out. And so, there's no reason in my mind that the humanist community at large cannot be a wonderful movement home and a wonderful family for young people who want to be around like-minded, free-thinking, good people. So circling all the way back to, the interesting conversations I've been having with members of our current base, who just really and truly, again, are having a really difficult time swallowing humanism, I'm sorry, swallowing social justice as a demonstration of humanists. I'm really curious. I ask questions and I don't always get not the right answer, but I don't get answers when I ask, well, what is it? What is it? Where are you getting stuck here? Because I think some of them may be a little embarrassed to even ask or make a statement about, what they can't wrap their head around. Anyway, saying all that to say, when we have these conversations, I think it's really important to point to our Humanist Manifesto, because it's really, really interesting. And inherently, while our manifesto, the current one, does not necessarily allude to some of the things that are important to us as we address social justice, I think there's an to what's currently there. So, for example, the very first point of the Humanist Manifesto is knowledge of the world is derived by observation, experimentation, and rational analysis. And essentially, that means we believe in science. I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what that means. We believe in science. We believe in experimentation. We believe in empirical evidence. We believe in exploring things as far as they possibly can go. The next one is that humans are an integral part of nature and the result of an unguided evolutionary change. And I think that that's pretty self-evident. We don't believe in God. We don't believe that there's, intelligent design. We think that things manifest as they are meant to. And we live in nature and we should live in harmony with it. The next one is, I find to be interesting also, is that ethical values are derived from human need and interest is tested by experience. And this is essentially the golden rule. And I think we know that this evolves over time. For example, when we think about our founding fathers, our problematic founding fathers, many of whom were slaveholders, we know that many of them had held problematic views. But when they wrote the framework for this country, if we take it out of the historical context, they're good words. And if all men were indeed created equal, and if they really meant that for everyone, that's great. But we also know that the society evolves. We evolve, and our laws have to evolve with us. So even the laws that we live by, that may not necessarily be written in policy, things evolve. And I think we're at a place right now where things are evolving. Some of our social habits are beginning to change in a really, really great way. For example, I was reading an article the other day that said that, young folks are literally tossing away the 2-week notice, which I think is great. I think it's a wonderful thing. If you don't need to give 2 weeks notice, or if your boss is not accepting it, just leave. It's a courtesy. People don't have to stay and be mistreated. And that's what's happening in our current society. So when you push your own boundaries, or you really draw a line in the sand and you hold your boundaries close to you, and they're unwavering, other people and other things have to bend. And that has not traditionally been the way in America. So I find it really interesting that, yes, we know that ethical values are derived from human need, but our needs are changing as a society. So it's interesting that some folks are having a problem understanding that the needs are changing. The needs of Black and Brown people and Indigenous people are changing. The needs of young people are changing. The needs of queer folks are changing. The needs of women are changing. And those who are assigned female at birth. There are so many things that are changing daily, it seems, almost, particularly since the pandemic. So again, I'm having a hard time understanding why others don't see that. The next one is that life's fulfillment emerges from individual participation in the service of humane ideals. And the way that it's written, it talks a lot about death, and it talks about, being at peace with ourselves, and, understanding that life is full of tragedies, and that's just a part of life. There's nobody waving a magic wand, making a thing happen, or making a thing not happen. it's really just being there for one another in times of joy and in times of when we have the need of comfort. But the word humane ideals, the words humane ideals, I find to be very interesting that folks are getting stuck. I don't understand why some of our existing folks don't understand, like you may understand, and like other people who, again, are from traditionally marginalized communities. We understand the humanity, and being humane is understanding the kind of violence that many of us live in each and every day. I live in Baltimore. I live in East Baltimore. I live in a food desert, which is not necessarily an issue for me because I have a car. Many of my neighbors do not. They have to walk to the grocery store, or they have to take a bus, or they have to take a Lyft or Uber or get a taxi. And here they have hack cabs. But people have to put themselves into really, really difficult positions in order to do something as basic as going to the grocery store. We are dealing with a level of like violence upon people that makes life almost untenable. I sit here along with you, probably sitting under a mountain of student debt. I do too. I have it. It's unnecessary. Back in the days when my parents went to college, you could wait tables over the summer or work a summer job and be able to pay for an Ivy League university, let alone, I believe many state colleges were actually free. Community colleges were free when my parents went to school. And again, I'm older than probably many of the people here, but it shouldn't be so expensive for us to better ourselves and better our society. We shouldn't be sitting under this kind of debt. It shouldn't be so difficult to obtain healthcare or not be able to pay our bills. Having a universal basic income would be tremendously helpful for most people. So I think it's interesting that the idea of what's humane really, as it's written, says that it really is not that it's somewhat more applicable to the living and dying situation, when our living situations are not humane in and of themselves. Again, this is social justice. These are the things that we have to address. We have to address the inequities in our society. We have to address how how so many people live in situations that are absolutely unjust. There are people in this country that do not have running water. I mean, and I'm not saying that their water's not on. They literally do not have infrastructure that goes to their home where they can turn on the water, turn on a faucet and get water. They have to go, as we say in the South, they got to go tote water. They have to go someplace to a hose pipe somewhere, a standpipe somewhere, and go fetch water and bring it back to their homes to flush their toilets, to brush their teeth, to cook with. It's absolutely unreasonable, and it's unfathomable that people in this country live that way. But yet, and still, they do, we do. Again, the disconnect from our current base to some of these ideals that are in our own Humanist Manifesto is absolutely staggering. The next one, and don't worry, there are only two more. The next one is that humans are social by nature and find meaning in relationships. And this one, I'm going to actually read the definition, and it's I love it. And again, it's so incredibly open, and the fact that people don't hear it and don't see it and see the need for us to step in is really interesting. Humanists long for and strive towards a world of mutual care and concern, free of cruelty and its consequences, where differences are resolved cooperatively without resorting to violence. The joining of individuality with interdependence enriches our lives, encourages us to enrich the lives of others, and inspires hope of obtaining peace, justice, and opportunity for all. If that is not social justice, I do not know what is. It literally says it all. Again, this is our Humanist Manifesto, the third one. There are three of them. This is exactly what we're talking about in everything as we're addressing social justice issues in humanism. Who are we as humanists if we are not inherently trying to alleviate the suffering of other people in this world? We're not doing it right if we're not doing that. And I think for too long, people in our secular community in general have been very, very comfortable talking about the idealism of humanism and having very lofty conversations and spirited debates about interesting things, fervent public discourse about other things. And it's been a space for intellectual debate, which I think is great. We need that, particularly, I will say, we do need that particularly as young folks who, or other people who may be walking away from religion and feel a bit untethered, and they want to make sense of it themselves. I think those spaces are great for that kind of identification, being able to identify like who you are and where you are in the world, and linking yourself with like-minded people and being able to bounce ideas off of people. Well, what if this, or what if that? I think those are really important conversations. But my brand of humanism is rooted in service. And if we're not serving one another, if we're not serving people, what are we doing? I think we're doing it wrong if we're not doing that. And I've said it, nearly everybody I've talked to is probably watching this and is hearing me say the same thing over and over again, but it's worth repeating over and over again. If we are not serving, what are we doing? We only have this one life, and we have to leave the world better than we found it. And we're not doing a very good job of that. I will say, interestingly enough, many decades ago, humanists were at the forefront of nearly every single progressive movement. When there has been a progressive win, it was always humanists at the vanguard, sitting there fighting those fights, fighting to enact, sound public policy, fighting in the legal system. And that's a lot of what we still continue to do. I was on a call earlier today with our legal team, talking about, a fight that's happening in the 11th Circuit Court over a public prayer in Florida. Imagine that, of all places. That was led by the police in a local town. Which we know is illegal and should not happen. It's unconstitutional. But those are the legal fights that we still have to have, because we see white nationalism on the rise, white evangelical nationalism, let me be clear about that, on the rise since not since January 6th, but we saw it front and center last year. And we continue to see, it, unfortunately flourishing in our society. So we continue to do those things legally, and fighting for policy and doing public actions, and trying to get legislation through Congress so that we can have policies that help to support people and families. But it's been really difficult explaining and getting folks to understand that we have got to lift each other up. And it's the time for talking is done. In this moment, there are quite a few needs that need to be satisfied. I was on a podcast on Saturday talking about reparations and the fact that reparations need to happen for Black Americans. My family is not American. In my family, England owes us. But the United States owes Black Americans unequivocally. And Black Americans have never seen justice done for them ever. And there need to be those conversations. We need to be pushing through conversations to have redress and relief for Black Americans. It's very, very important that we stop shying away from those conversations that neoliberals don't want to have. They don't want to have a conversation and don't want to argue with other people about, okay, well, my family wasn't here, or I didn't do this, or I didn't do that. That has absolutely nothing to do with anything. Black folks in this country need redress. They need relief. They deserve justice. And it is really important that we are having those conversations as humanists. And thankfully, it's at least, hopefully going for debate into a vote in the House soon about reparations. But we need to be having these conversations, and it's really difficult. My last point of the Humanist Manifesto, and I think this one sums it all up beautifully. Working to benefit society maximizes individual happiness. It's interesting. I'm very much like if you've seen the movie A Beautiful Mind, John Nash, the economist, says his Nobel Prize winning theory essentially says that, what is best for the individual is what's best for everyone. And that's exactly what this says. We seek to minimize the inequities of circumstance and ability, and we support a just distribution of nature's resources and the fruits of human effort so that as many as possible can enjoy a good life. In a nutshell, these last 2 points in particular really illustrate social justice. And I don't understand why it's been such a question for folks. Again, I think the people who are here, the young folks and some of us that are like middle-aged who may be hanging around, and maybe some older folks who are here, it's social justice is exactly humanism, and humanism is social justice. It is justice. It is meant to be egalitarian. It is meant to be free thinking, rooted in common sense and kindness and compassion. When we talk about the European evolution of humanism through the Enlightenment, it's the Enlightenment. That's exactly what they were talking about. But it's time for us to bring humanism out of the textbooks and out of the halls of discourse. And it's past time for us to get our feet moving and get our hands dirty. And I've started some of that work internally within our organization by recreating the staff culture. I think we know that managers and workplaces are a fickle thing. But it's really important that folks enjoy coming to work. I know that sounds strange. Nobody dreams of labor. I realize that. But we have work to do. And in particular, our organization has work to do. And it's important that our staff are appreciated and that they're treated well and that they have an environment where they can be creative, where they can think about innovative ways to support our community, where we can come together collaboratively and do our work and support one another. And that requires us having a really, really fluid work culture. We have flexible hours. We have flex time where folks can take a couple of hours off each week to take a nap, to go do what they need to do, run an errand, sit with their kids, cuddle with a puppy, whatever makes them happy. But that culture, creating a collaborative staff culture where even though we have a leadership structure, I believe in collaborative work culture. And so bringing everyone together for us to decide our work together is really quite important. Our staff are probably in a place of stasis right now. We're getting ready to have our first staff retreat in a couple of weeks. But once we decide how we're going to move out in the world, then our next move is to work with our partners like SSA, like Black Non-Believers, and other organizations, that are adjacent to us, even though I dislike the word competitor, but other folks in our space like American Atheists, Humanist International, organizations that we work very, very closely with. It's important that we build those bridges and those connections with one another. And so we'll be doing that quite a bit, and then we'll be rippling out. So I want to make sure to like give everyone a clear understanding. One of the things we're getting ready to do a communications audit, and that's going to include SSA and all of the students that organize at SSA. I want to hear from you. We want to hear from you. We want to hear what's important to you, what kind of supports you need, where you are, not when you leave and have the opportunity to become an AHA member. That's not even the issue. I want to hear how we can better support the Student Secular Alliance. And young people where they are. How can we build better bridges and support and resource you where you are? How can we be like the older sibling with a very, very big voice and a big footprint, because we have one? How do we leverage the privilege that we have as the organization we are to support the work that you do better? And I mean that as SSA staff and as SSA members. So down the line, please look for, one second. Sorry, little interrupter. We will be doing listening sessions, and I'll be working with SSA staff to organize some of those. And those invitations should go out probably in the next 2 months or so, within the next 2 months. And then Kevin and I were just chatting a little bit about doing a free membership, it's free AHA membership for SSA members. So you'll be getting some information about that later on. But I look forward to, to fielding your questions and If you feel free to put them in the chat, or I guess that's the only way we can do that. So please feel free to put your questions in the chat, and then I will answer them as they come in. The Humanist Manifesto. It is, hang on, I have it up, or I had it up. Ooh, did I close it? Oh no, I did not. Yes, I did. I'm lying. It's in here somewhere. Give me 1 second. I'm looking for it. But it is on our website, which is americanhumanist.org. And you can go there and you can look. Actually, all three of the Humanist Manifestos are there. The first, second, and third. The first one was written in 1933. Here you go. I'm going to link it right here.
Emily just did.
Thank you, Emily. Hi, Emily. That's one of my wonderful colleagues, Emily Newman.
Okay, I really appreciate that. As we're sort of listening, I think one of the things that a constant message to our students is, I think non-religion is one of the ties that bind them, as well as the belief in the separation of church and state. So if you had to pick two things, that's the common ground. And of course, everyone's life experiences help determine what priorities they have in life and what their passions are and those sorts of things. And so we often say, great, you're an atheist. That tells me a little bit about you, but really tell me what you're passionate about and how you want to make the world a better place before you leave, for yourself and for others. And so I love that you also sort of address that. And before we get into the questions, I'd love for you to sort of tap into, we very much see, and I think part of our rationale in looking at social justice and what compromises a lot of social justice in the United States, when you look at issues of race and sexism and anti-LGBT, so sexual orientation and gender identity, environment, anti-science. In the United States, we really find there's a strong correlation. The people who sort of fight against that equality and the betterment of all are oftentimes fighting that with religious justification. So the Bible says, or, I support creationism, not evolution, or I'm anti-vax because God's going to protect me, or the Bible says this about dark people or gay people or women have their place. Can you touch just a little bit about that separation of church and state angle?
Oh, it's so important. That was part of the conversation we were having earlier, and the fact that it has absolutely no place. We all know that prayer does not work. It does nothing. And what works is action. The conversation we were having around the legal case in Ocala, Florida, they had a prayer meeting. Prayer is not going to fix violence. You have to address the root cause of violence, which is poverty, and it is inaction. Creating police, you want to do something great, do a police athletically, keep the young people busy. Maybe we address folks going hungry and having stable housing. There's so many other things, and here's the thing, we can always throw the Bible back at people. I think many of us are atheists because we read the Bible. Faith without works is dead. And that really sums it up. And the only thing in the Bible, if we're going to quote here, the only thing Jesus ever said in the Bible was love one another as I've loved you. And those are two things that they can't say another thing about. They can't say another retort to that. Because if we are not serving, and if we're not treating people well, if we're not minding our business, meaning we're not in other people's business and interfering with their agency as individual people, then what are we doing? We can't do that. We cannot infringe on the rights of other people. And leaning into the Constitution is so important, where there are separations on purpose. Even the framers intended for us to have separation of church and state. It's written down. It's baffling that people want to argue the Bible in juxtaposition to the Constitution that was clearly meant to separate the Bible from government. We are not supposed to have a state government or a state religion. So those things don't matter. If they want to do that, then they can apply that to themselves. But I also just don't argue with people like that. You can't change their minds, and I just don't believe in arguing with people when they're so entrenched in their beliefs. It's more a matter of, hey, look, we disagree on this thing. What are you doing to make people's lives better? And me and I, as a humanist and my humanist community, we can talk about what we're doing. What are you doing? What are you doing to make people's lives better without judgment? and the conversation probably would fizzle out.
Larry asked, it was one of the first questions we got in. He says, with the black backlash coming from the right to limit exposure of children to the ideas their parents may disagree with, how can humanism and secular ideals be introduced to and nurtured in young people during their various developmental phases?
That's difficult if you're talking kids countering parents. I think there's probably, look, Kevin, there's probably some programming we can think about creating to support young people who have strong ideals. I know a lot of young people, unfortunately, particularly if they're in extremely religious homes, it can be really abusive. And I'm not accusing religious people of abusing their children. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that, like, if a child, has certain ideals and they're in conflict with their religious parents' ideals, it can be very, very difficult for them to feel comfortable and at home and loved in their space. I think one of the things we can talk about is we can really fight to create spaces that are free from religion where children are. And so they're in school most of the time. So keeping religion out of school, I'm incensed that my daughter's, being made to say the Pledge of Allegiance every morning. And it drives me absolutely crazy. And that's one of the things we can open up some of that discourse and have those conversations. But short of like creating clubs and avenues where kids can sit in community with like-minded kids and at least feel like they can be at peace, it's very difficult to infringe on the rights of parents. And I know that it sounds horrible, but it is very difficult to, infringe on the rights of parents there.
And, clearly this is something that we think about a lot. And we have a high school, a 15-week high school curriculum that looks at various issues. And some of the things that you talked about today looks at the historical backgrounds and then what do they want to do about it? So again, into that action. But it also develops their critical thinking. And while that really has a difficult place that young, really college universities is where we really start to hone those skills. And why supporting students, especially in college university, is so crucial. And the fact that we're finding more and more students coming younger and younger. We have middle school students who are wanting to start chapters. So that tells you, I think, the transformation that's taking place in those sort of ideals.
Mm-hmm.
And the short answer to me, there's clearly SSA and finding community and the other orgs supporting students and those things is crucially important. The easiest answer to me on that is run for your school board. Make sure your ideals are the ones in there, because let me tell you, religious people are organizing like crazy so that they are. So we need that counterbalance in there for rational, critically thinking minded people to be involved in what our schools are doing.
Mm-hmm.
So on the shore.
Yeah, and I also think that, like, to be real, like, I think those of us that are secular and those of us that are humanists parents could do a better job of holding space and creating space for our kids, which is really difficult to do.
So John asked a question. He says, have you ever seen or experienced a position that's too woke, i.e. that unjustly confrontational against a person who is not being intentionally racist, but who may be committing an unconscious microaggression?
Here's the thing. I think we can be fair and we can hold space for people who are ignorant. And I think there's a difference between being belligerently racist and saying or doing something and you really don't know. I know plenty of people in my own personal life who were like, oh, I had no idea. You had no idea. You had no idea police were killing Black people. Like, and they may say things that, you even sometimes have to say those things to people of color. Sometimes POC are the worst perpetuators of white supremacy culture. It's harrowing. Hang on one second. Sorry, y'all. But I think that's when you take a person to the side and you have just a very, very civil conversation and hold space for them in love and explain, you shouldn't say that or you should not do that because, and I don't know if you've not thought about this. particularly if they're people that we care about or people that we interact with on a regular basis. But I will say this, that as far as racism goes, I would put that in a category that, with the caveat that Black and brown people should not have to do that. If you are a white person hearing that from another white person, you need to check that, because we're tired. Black and brown people are tired. We're exhausted, and we don't have the energy on many days. And it may not come out very friendly. But if you know, and if you could see, you hear something, you'd be like, let me talk to you over here really quickly. Let me explain why, so-and-so did not receive that well, or why you shouldn't say that, or why that's a horrible thing and you may not know. Let me explain. I use the phrase all the time, but I'm like, white people you got to come get your cousins and handle that. But again, for POC, we need to hold each other accountable too. When we hear something, I will tell people, and I've had to say this to my parents before, like, that is so racist. Please don't say that. Because they've said things about other people, other brown people. And I'm like, oh, no. We're not doing that. We don't do that. Because not only because it's wrong, but because my child is here and she's hearing you say that. And I don't need her repeating something she doesn't understand. But yeah, I think we have to hold space and again, hold compassion and kindness for people. We should never not have room to help someone understand. And that's part of what we need to do, like as AHA, larger AHA, with our existing base. We have to hold space for them to ask really, really hard questions that they may be embarrassed to ask, or that they may feel that they'll be ostracized if they ask, or, I don't understand why so-and-so and such and such is doing so-and-so and such and such. Well, let me explain it to you. And we just have to continue to hold space. Now, if some people, some things are just a little too far left for others. And it's okay if they just can't participate in the space anymore. And I'm not saying that we need to boot them out, but if people just really can't come along, it's okay. It's okay. They can be as involved or uninvolved as they like within their comfort level. But we're going to continue to do the right thing. We're going to continue to do the right work moving forward.
I appreciate that. And I think on the for SSA, we continue to see a growing number of women in leadership and membership in leadership. The percentage of people of color that we have who are involved in the organization continues to grow and is by far way more than any of the national organizations. The number of LGBT and trans and gender nonconforming people, I would say, is probably more than the other organizations and secular movements. And we would say, this is what's coming up. And so I think we have to, and I'll speak for the white men, being non-religious, just in the general term, is a point of privilege to be able to say that as easily as we do. Mm-hmm. And so for other communities, that gets much more difficult. So we have to then, I think, make space and make an open and warm and welcoming environment, and allow others to have their own experiences they need, and recognizing that in some of those communities, it's really difficult. Mm-hmm. And we can help. We can make it harder, or we can make it easier. Let's hope that we're doing our best to make it easier.
Right. Agreed.
So Sue says, as a long-term AHA member who happens to be an 80-year-old grandmother and lesbian, she says, I love being with young folks. So she says, I participated in some intergenerational programs in my LGBTQ groups. Do you see AHA sponsoring social justice oriented intergenerational efforts as a possible way of involving more young people and folks in AHA, and to add value to other members' lives?
I'm so glad you said that, Sue. Yes. And it's something that I absolutely love intergenerational spaces. I mean, when I say love, I mean like love. I think it's so important that we create spaces where generations can learn from one another in a really, really warm and like comfortable soup together. Soup generally doesn't sound very good, but I think it's nice and warm and comfortable. Our older generation have so much history and knowledge, like just life knowledge, lived experience. And then those who've been in the movement have movement history to pass on. And I could not imagine not having a space where our older members cannot pass that information on to people who need to understand the arc of where they are currently. Where did this movement come from? It came from humanists. It came from humanists leading the charge, again, being at the vanguard of progressive movements. So here we are, we're kind of in this place where it's, now we've got to kind of shake the dirt off and shake the dust off and shake the moss off and like get rolling again. We've got young people who may not know and have all of the context that you have, but I will say young folks are so smart, and intuitive and self-actualized and so grounded in who they are and the world that they want to manifest. And honestly, unfortunately, and I say it like with the deepest regret, young folks are already so doggone uncomfortable. They're willing to get a little bit more uncomfortable if it means that everyone can be equal, have real equality and real justice. The same thing that older folks who are older than I am, marched for, that they went through just so many travails to get through. I love intergenerational spaces and I look forward to cultivating them. I wonder what flavor they're going to be. I don't know. I think of them as really, really vibrant spaces, more so than anything else. But yes, we will have them, and we will have them in abundance. My ideal is that's what our chapters and our affiliates are. That's what those meetings will look like if and when we can ever get back to in person too, would be nice. But having those spaces be intergenerational spaces.
Great. I'm sort of combine two questions and looking sort of the Humanist Manifesto as humanism, human, and do we expand that sort of topic? So as the Earth is a living organism, and what do we see the relations between, like, I think all of Earth and humanity? From Larry and Neil. Neil is a vegan and very much for animal rights. I love Neil to death. Should humanism, is there enough room in humanism to throw in all sentient beings rather than just what's good for humans?
I'm starting to learn a lot more about that, honestly. I was on a webinar last week about sentientism. I'm hoping I'm saying that right. With Amy Halpern-Lath and Jamie Woodruff. It was interesting, and it gave me a lot of food for thought. What I loved about that conversation is that part of what they were hearkening to is how people lived before there was religion. And people, if and when there was a need to consume animals, it was more thoughtful, and they used every part of it as not to waste, as to honor the life of the animal. Clearly, the point is not to consume sentient animals, but I think the question is, like, I think people continue to ask, like, what sentience? Are plants sentient? Can they feel? Can, fungi are created by, are connected by a mycelial network. Are they alive? Do we know? So, like, saying all this to say that, like, there's room for those questions and there's room to explore that. But I absolutely do believe that, there's room for us to expand what humanism means, because humanism as it is again, more ideal and more, very, very flowery, lovely language. And we need to be more bold about what humanism is. It needs to be more radical. We have to be more radical about how we love. And that does include the earth. That does include people and things on it. So, whether we do it the same way together, I don't think that ever works. I believe in decentralized networks. I think those are terribly powerful. So there's room for people to be like, I respect everything that's living, period, point blank. And that's that. I consume no animal products, no animal meat, anything. And then if there are people that are somewhere on the spectrum, I think that it's okay, but we do need to start having those conversations. And I'm glad that we're beginning to have them in this movement in a really meaningful way. Like, it's not being like poo-pooed at. At least I didn't find that. I think people were asking like really, really good questions, but then there was like the cascade of, well, what about so-and-so? What about this? And what about that? But I think if we can have an open and honest and respectful dialogue about what that means and just try to understand is the first part of sentientism and getting to the place that you're asking about.
Wonderful. Gerald says, in an effort to bring in more young people into humanism and enacting humanist principles, how much should we rely on public education? How much should we bypass that as a failed path to social justice?
Oh, you're so right. Yeah, just ignore it. Ignore it. You know, we believe in pursuing your own path and identifying for yourself what your morality is and identifying for yourself what works for you. I think finding your own community, just like they say, find your own people, find your own people. I don't think the public education is where it's at, unfortunately, and that makes me really, really sad. My child is in public school. She will likely attend a public university. It's sad that we cannot depend on our public school system because it's being purchased by dark money left and right. We know that the Koch network, for example, is a powerful organization that's buying public education wholesale. So that's not really the place that we should be looking to expand our knowledge about social issues. You know, we as parents and those of us that have, who know people who are in school, it's up to us to enrich the lives of children in their education. We have to supplement what they're learning. And that takes our effort, but it also takes community. And so I think, if we can think about some of the more powerful memories, those of us that grew up in a religious background have, some of our most powerful memories happen in church. They happen in a place where we were sitting in community with people who shared something important with us at the time. That is what we seek to create here at AHA now. And I am certain that other secular spaces are looking to continue to create that kind of community so that we can examine those things and make sense of them with and for young people. To kind of, figure out which end is up.
I think for most part, I think all of the secular organizations really look at, especially at the grassroots local level, are looking at how do we create community as a vehicle for people to come together, be with like-minded people, and then sort of act out your passions and your life and your activism. And so I think those are all and that's what we very much do with the Secular Student Alliance. We obviously are working with students in schools and most of the time in public institutions. But again, it's that what we're doing co-curricularly or extracurricularly that is adding, I think, to that in the long run. You touched on sort of congregation and community. So Patricia says she's a member of the an ethical society, a local ethical society group. I'm not sure. I'm going to skip over that one.
Yeah, the Susquehanna.
There we go. Yeah, so with American Ethical Union, and they meet congregationally. Is there a place for congregational humanism in AHA?
Absolutely, and it's funny because I'm very close to your congregation leader, J. Exodus Hooper, is a darling, an absolute darling, who leads that congregation. There is absolutely room for that. Again, I don't think we need to be so prescriptive in the current brand or the next brand of humanism. We don't need to be so prescriptive about how we humanist. I think there's room for us to have congregational communities, whether they would be ethical or Unitarian Universalist, or they're just Sunday congregations. I know that those exist in the world. I also want to be careful of us not trying to replicate what church does. But at the end of the day, what most of us miss when we leave church is community. So if our communities look like congregations, that's fine. As long as we're together and we're doing something that we love and we're serving one another and we're serving the world around us. I think that's all that matters. How you call yourself is kind of irrelevant, honestly.
Yeah, I'll say we having a strong network of local chapters all in schools all across the country. The pandemic was really sort of devastating. So we know over 80% of our students come from religious households. So when schools closed, they left their SSA groups, they left their friend network, they left that and went back to religious families and religious communities. Mm-hmm. And Ryan Burge did the study. His 2018 results that came out in 2020 showed that almost 47% of young people were non-religious, and that actually dipped the next year because I think people went home and were in these communities and didn't have that support. Even we were providing it virtually, it's not the same. We know that. So I think those are sort of interesting things for us, especially coming out of the pandemic. I think some of the things you're talking about are almost even more crucially important in providing and that ability to come back together. And we're in a huge effort of reaching out to college students just to sort of do that as well. So we're about wrapping up. I know you see the questions. Is there anything that you particularly want to like jumps out at you? I don't want to give you an opportunity.
Honestly, I think I really want to let everyone know that I'm looking very much forward to building community together. I'm not shying away from this, and I hope that you won't either. I think that we can build really, really, really deep connections between the AHA and SSA, and create really vibrant communities out in the world. I will say this though, as we are working on like staff culture, and then we're going to be working on building community within the AHA, like membership, with members and with chapters and with affiliates. Give us a minute. It's going to take a minute before we're ready to receive you. So I'm saying that to say, like, don't flood to the AHA chapters right at this very moment, unless you really want to. I mean, please know that you're welcomed. But I don't want you to show up and then be like, oh no, this is not for me, because we're not ready yet. We are working on building, doing really, really deep community building right now internally. So give us a minute. Again, hopefully, you'll take advantage of the membership that's coming that will cost you absolutely nothing, but that will give you an idea of what's going on within the AHA, and so that you can see our progress. And then maybe when it looks right, it may feel a little right when you're seeing some of the things that are happening, maybe you'll dip your toe in at that point and just check the water. But again, I'm really looking forward to to engaging with the students. And with your staff, Kevin, also, so that we can learn more and more about the needs that all of you have, how we can better support you, and how we can really build a strong youth movement, a secular youth movement. It's so important in this moment that we build power together, and we are very, very interested in helping to do that.
And that's great. And I would think there are. I acknowledge what you're saying about there needing to be change, just growth and development change within some areas of AHA, but there are some really active, vibrant, socially justice-minded, activist AHA groups, local groups out there that are doing some fantastic things and do some wonderful things to support students. So there is that, and there's also a lot of virtual, online, national stuff that AH offers that students would really enjoy and like. So there's offerings there, and so it's going to get better.
It is absolutely going to get better, and we're going to work together with you to make it better. I just was floating the idea with Kevin of creating a youth track at our annual meeting in July or June, at the end of June. So again, keep checking us. Like, come take a look, see who's doing what in your area. If you see an active chapter, please do go. Please introduce yourself. And if there's not a chapter anywhere near you and you're interested in starting one, if you're graduating and going out into the world from university, or you're going off to college and there's not a chapter locally, please, you'll probably likely start an SSA chapter, but if you are interested in linking up with like an AHA chapter or an affiliate, reach out, and let's see what we can do. I would love to see how we can support you and students better.
That's fantastic, and we definitely look forward to it. I will say there's some of the links that were discussed during this. We sent in an email usually within 2 days after this with the recording. So if anyone wants to watch it again, I'll also include the links. So you'll have it for the Humanist Manifesto and those sorts of things. So you have links that we discussed here, the participants during this. And then there were a number of questions. I apologize for the questions we didn't get to. There was some with youth and race, and talking about some of the current social things that are happening. And I am not one to often announce something before it's solid, but we are working on April, because it's almost like it's 94% done. so I'm breaking my own rule, but working with Jane Elliott, who has done some fantastic work with race relations. So, and having a webinar with her. So I'm super looking forward to that. I'm getting chills as I'm saying it, because I can remember when watching presentations of her and her saying stuff and just me going, oh. So, which is good. You have to hear that stuff. So she is a member of our community. She is active. And so we're super looking forward to moving forward with that. So I'm breaking my own rule, announcing something before it's solid yet, but I'm doing it anyway.
It's okay. I understand. I'm totally like fangirling out a little bit too. So it's perfectly fine. And we'll share that through our networks also. She's amazing. And I heard her on the radio this morning. Some Ricky Smiley morning show, I believe, was had a clip of her. And I was like, hitting it home at the end of Black History Month. Thank you so much, Jane.
Yeah. And she's fired up about CRT. So I'm loving that. Well, I want to thank you so much today for being here. Welcome. I think this is a first time to sort of present you on behalf of the SSA. So I love that thank you for making that opportunity and that availability for us. And I really look forward to our students getting more involved with AHA and our organization getting more involved with AHA. And just, I think that great partnership and working together that can really happen. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to the relationship we're going to be really strengthening over the next couple of months. So thank you so much.
Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for participating. And again, go to our webinar page and look at what we have coming up. Thank you.
Thanks. Have a good night.